just wanted to let you know. But I wish I knew when people would join.
I know. Well, we'll just say if anyone is in the live stream, you can comment something or just comment something so we can see your name.
Yeah, where is everyone from? Are you guys in the St. Louis area?
I don't even know if there's anyone in here. Might have to give it like a minute or two.
Okay.
Yeah, Maricella's here.
Yay. Hi, Maricela.
I know Trinity said she was going to be here, so where is Trinity? We can't see the names, but I'm trying to guess who would be in here. Oh, Tiana.
Awesome. So, well, as people start filtering in, I think I will continue just by playing the video, and then we'll represent the topic right after. Is the sound good, Soad?
Yep, sounds good to me.
All right, go ahead and get started by playing this video.
And I come before you without a speech, but I come with a heart that is weighed down by the senseless oppression and killing of our black siblings. We all see it, we have heard the cries, we've heard "I Can't Breathe" from Eric Gardner, George Floyd, we've seen Breonna Taylor killed in our home, but I just stand before you with a heart that wants to see change. I strongly encourage everyone to go out and be the change. The work doesn't stop now. We have to keep fighting, because Martin Luther King said, if you cannot fly, run. If you cannot run, walk. And if you cannot walk, crawl. But you must keep moving forward. Why not make a better world for your future children from a social standpoint? Bring an end to social injustice. We are powerful beyond measures. Our voices will be heard. Together we are strong. Because when you stand with us, you stand for something. And if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything. So please go out, take heed to my word, go out and be the change, because we need you. Stand with us in the streets and vote with us as well.
See, privilege has the ability to dismantle systematic and systemic oppression by providing an opportunity, a voice, a share in the power in certain situations and conversations. And know that it is your responsibility to speak for the voiceless. Together, our willpower can collectively overpower this oppressed society to form a more perfect union.
I want to begin by sharing a quote from social justice activist Martin Luther King. "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Now, more than ever, we are being faced with many challenges as a society. Not only are we being challenged with the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're also experiencing the pandemic of racism. For years, this administration has attempted to use the most powerful tactic against us: division. That allyship is the bridge between that divide. We need to say that this is enough, and that we will not accept this for future generations. We need to be the change. We need to love. In a world full of hate and violence, spread love. The president is not the system. The vice president is not the system. The system is your local judges and representatives. The system is your senators and governors. The system is every elected position granted through this democracy, which is why every vote and election matters. So what are you going to do after this? Who do you want to be? What side of history do you want to be on? We can use our privilege in many ways, but most importantly, we can vote.
Words carry power. Actions can be powerful. We vote to put people in power, and we within ourselves have power.
Stand with us, vote with us, and fight with us. Go out and be the change, because we need you.
Okay, everyone, that was just a little bit of a segue into what it is we're going to be talking about. The speakers in that video were from student leaders on the Maryville campus. As you can see, their names on the left side of the screen. But just to go ahead and jump to the next slide, the topic we will be presenting today is called "It's Not Just Politics," presented by myself and my partner, Soad Salem. We are the InclusiveMU ambassadors. My name is Damon Gonzalez. I use he, his, him pronouns, and I am a fourth-year Rawlings Sports Business Management major.
And hello, everyone. My name is Soad Salem. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth-year biology pre-med major. And I don't know if everyone in here is from Maryville, but we do attend Maryville University, in case that wasn't brought up.
And go ahead and feel free to put that. I can't see the chat myself, but just to help Soad, I'd like to know who is here in the chat. Just if you could write down like the school you attend, just so we could see who's here. I'd really, really appreciate that. Thank you. And just to get a little bit of an overview of what we will be talking about today, we'll get started with some important definitions along with examples, and then we'll dive into some discriminatory laws and along with some social constructs behind those laws and how they've affected our society in which we live in today, the importance of voting, and the process in how you could vote.
Yeah, we got a lot of Maryville here, a lot of fellow RAs too. Okay.
Nice.
All right. So when we dive into this presentation, it's going to be really important to understand social identities and how they play into the concept of intersectionality. And so here we have John Doe in the middle. Just we named him John Doe. And so John Doe has various social identities. As you can see, he can identify as a particular race or a particular sexuality. And so he'll have different memberships in these various social identities. And based off of these memberships, he'll either be privileged or targeted. But it's also important to keep in mind that when we talk about intersectionality, we talk about how your various social identities can come together, and maybe you might experience a different form of discrimination based off of intersectionality of being maybe targeted in various categories. And so we will get into more detail about this throughout the presentation, but the concept of intersectionality and even social identities in general is going to be very important to keep in mind. Okay, and so again, quickly before we jump in, we have the various social identities listed to our left, and then the social group memberships that are considered privileged. And so when we do talk about discrimination, we talk about individuals who are targeted. And so this is kind of just for yourself as a reminder when we do go through this presentation, although some of these concepts may not affect you based off of your status, there are things that you can do. So if you are privileged and you do look at the situations that we talk about later, you can think of it in that point of view to see what you can do in that situation.
And to get started with definitions, we've been talking a lot about intersectionality so far, but just the general gist of it is that everyone has their unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, whether that be the gender, race, class, or sexual orientation, or even physical ability. And then we have qualified immunity, and qualified immunity basically permits law enforcement and other government officials to violate people's constitutional rights with virtual impunity. An example I like to give of qualified immunity was one of which unfortunately occurred the past year with the shooting of Breonna Taylor. Brett Hankinson, one of the 3 officers involved with Breonna Taylor's shooting, was indicted for wanton endangerment, which is a Class D felony, which is the lowest of all classes. And when in reality, it was like the murder of another person. So that's just the example I like to bring up. And then targeted groups are social groups that are negatively valued, considered to be inferior, abnormal, or dependent, and given limited access to resources and power. Examples I'd give of targeted groups from race could be Black, Latino, and Native people. Gender, anyone who may identify as transgender. Sexual orientation, lesbian and gay men. Religion, Jews and Muslims. And age, the elderly and the youth. And that systemic oppression would be then the final definition: laws and regulations used to limit opportunities to target groups, and these laws then create obstacles directed towards people of color. And so in this next slide, we'll then get into a little bit more examples of systemic oppression. First example I'd like to talk about is incarceration. So out of every 100,000 Black men, over 4,000 are incarcerated. And because of felony disenfranchisement laws, 13% of those men are denied their right to vote. And for those of you who do not know what disenfranchisement laws are, it's basically laws that allow you to be stripped of certain rights and privileges for going up to jail for longer than a year, or be fined up to $1,000 for whatever reason. And being stripped of those rights and privileges could be like the right to vote, which could then affect your involvement with local and presidential elections, which, as we know, the voice and participation of everybody during an election is extremely important. And another example I'll bring up of systemic oppression is drug arrests. So 40% of drug arrests are for the possession of marijuana. And Black and white Americans both commonly use marijuana, even in, especially in states where the use is legal. However, Black Americans are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for the possession. And just to give like a little bit of examples in terms of how the marijuana possession charges follow. For your first offense, you could go up to jail for a year, be charged up to $1,000, and on your record, it could be labeled as a misdemeanor. For your second offense, you could go up to jail for about 2 years. You could be fined up to $2,500, and will then be qualified as a misdemeanor. And for your third offense, the judge then has the ability to whether charge you for a misdemeanor or a felony. You'll go up to jail for up to 3 years, and you could be fined up to $5,000. And either of these charges will remain on the person's record, which would then make it extremely difficult for them to find, good jobs, good housing, and even be able to help get their bank loans paid off. So it really has like a huge, like, dramatic effect down the line if you are charged with anything of sort of a felony disenfranchisement law. And so now we're going to get into a little bit about discriminatory laws, social constructs, and how it's affecting our day-to-day lives in today's society.
Okay. So obviously we couldn't choose all the discriminatory laws that we found in the United States, but we did want to pinpoint some discriminatory laws that were related to social identities and basically how it happened and why they're still here. And so the first discriminatory law that we have is the Plessy versus Ferguson. And so essentially what this was that it said that railroads had to be separate, but they would get equal accommodation for both individuals of white and colored races. And how this came to be was a man by the name of Homer Plessy refused to sit in an all-black car. He said that it was his constitutional right and that it was violated because he could sit wherever he wanted. And so because of that incident, Plessy versus Ferguson happened. And so basically what it was trying to say was that, we're going to have two railroads. They're going to be equal. We'll provide the same resources for both of them. These individuals just can't mix simply because some are white and then others are colored. And so Damon will get into the social construct behind that and the effect that it had on society.
And so the social construct behind Plessy versus Ferguson, a very key phrase that Soad mentioned when talking about Plessy versus Ferguson is that separate but equal line. That separate but equal line, I believe, is solely responsible for creating that mental and social divide amongst Black African Americans with other people in the U.S. who do not identify with that social identity. And that is just off of the fact that things are just not equal from both sides. And we'll get a little bit more into that, especially once we see like the communities where a majority of people of color come from and how they don't share the same resources and how it's just simply not separate and equal. And that's just how it's affected us in today's society.
Okay, and then the next event that we had was the Mexican repatriation. And so I don't know if a lot of you had heard about this, but I actually hadn't heard about it until recently, and it was extremely shocking to me. And so what happened was basically the logic behind these, so essentially it was a raid. And the logic behind these raids were that Mexican immigrants were using resources and taking jobs that were supposed to be going to white Americans. And this was after the Great Depression. And so basically they blamed individuals of Mexican descent for white people not having enough jobs. And so what they did was based off of the physical characteristics of an individual, which they associated with somebody of Mexican descent. They would raid your house, stop you, and then deport you back to Mexico. And so this happened to about 1 million Mexicans, and 60% of them were U.S. citizens. So keep in mind that as a citizen of this country, you have certain rights. And one of your rights is to be here. But despite that, you are still deported back to Mexico. And so it's also really important to keep in mind that this did not happen as a U.S.-wide initiative. Instead, it was local. So it was local governments that were pushing this, and they were actually able to accomplish this.
And so the social construct behind the Mexican Repatriation Act is how Mexican Americans pose as a dangerous threat to the way of life for other Americans. Both of these examples, behind Plessy versus Ferguson and the Mexican Repatriation Act, have kind of it's really much more evident in terms of like the older generations. That's where the social construct and that divide really comes in. The older generations, not as much as so I feel like with the youth. But we've seen scenarios in the years past, leading up to the election, how people would confront others who are not from or don't identify with their social identity. I know we've all seen on social media examples of like for a Hispanic person going into a store and a woman confronting that person, telling them to leave the country, speak English, which in a sense is like I said, much more evident amongst like the older generation of having that like problem. But I remember also with the Plessy versus Ferguson, something I forgot to mention was that there was a video I saw where there was people participating in the Black Lives Matter protests, and a participant, not a participant, but someone, a bystander, an older white woman, confronted some of these participants in the protest and said, for as long as I'm alive, I will forever teach my children to hate you. So just how we see that divide amongst the older generations, it's the same way with the Hispanics and Mexican Americans in our country, unfortunately. But I do believe that is much more evident in the older generations, not as much with the youth.
Okay, and so we just discussed some discriminatory laws related to race. But now we're going to be talking about ethnicity. And so it's really important to know the distinction between the two. And so if anyone in the chat, real quickly, is anyone able to tell us the difference between race and ethnicity? You won't get a grade, it's okay. Even if you're wrong, it's okay. Nothing? No one? Okay. All right, so we have two examples here. We'll go ahead and use these examples as to make our difference. And so on the left, we have Heidi Klum, and then on the right, we have Trevor Noah. And so as you can see here, the way that Heidi Klum would identify with her social identity of race would be white, while Trevor Noah would identify as Black. And so you can kind of see that race is really according to your physical characteristics, such as your skin color. And so solely off of their skin color, we can determine what their race is. However, their ethnicity is not as simple. And so as you can see here, Heidi Klum is a German American, and Trevor Noah is South African. And so ethnicity is more of a social construct, and that's going to reflect characteristics such as your culture, your values, your language, can even play into your political background, your history, and then even your geographic ancestry. And so it's going to be really important because there are certain discriminatory laws that can affect you due to your race and others that can affect you because of your ethnicity. And then Damon is going to play this quick video for us before we get into this section.
Is America and Iran relations affected already? But we are people, we are not the government. We are not nothing. If the government do something wrong with this government, we are not responsible, American and Iranian. What they can do? Why I have to be punished for somebody else's problem? I can. I don't know what I have to do. We don't know from the Iranian country they do something like this, but we didn't know we're gonna have same situation here. And we were citizens about 15, 20 years. And my brother didn't do nothing wrong in no place in the world. And I didn't do nothing wrong. I'm a contractor, I'm working hard here. I'm building a house for the people, the American people, and I'm American too.
Okay. And so basically what this video was about was that around 2018, Donald Trump had written an executive order placing the Muslim ban. And so what the Muslim ban essentially did was it banned different nationals, individuals who were from Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Yemen. And these countries kind of changed, throughout each Muslim ban that was instated because there were 3. However, they tended to target individuals who came from countries that were Muslim dominated. And so, it's important that when we talk about these bans, we understand that these were put forth through executive orders of the President of the United States. What he wanted was he didn't want individuals who came from certain countries to be allowed into the United States. And so he put the executive order forth not once, not twice, but 3 times. And obviously each time it was in place for a while, but eventually it was struck down. However, the second Muslim ban was actually upheld by the Supreme Court. And so we actually saw that one come into play for a while, and through different organizations such as the ACLU, CARE, Empower, and all these different organizations, there was able to be hearings and things of that sort, in which eventually the Muslim ban wasn't put into place. However, it's important to understand that during one of these Muslim bans, one of them was struck down by a federal district court judge. And so later we'll talk about the relevance as to why it's important to know that it was struck down by a federal district court judge, but you do want to know that that was in the power of a judge to strike an executive order by the President of the United States at the time. And we had done this presentation before Joe Biden was elected as president. And so one of the first things he did as president was sign an executive order removing the Muslim ban. And so it's no longer in place. And that was one of the first 20 executive orders that he put into place on his first day.
And so the social construct surrounding the executive order given by the Trump administration is that it really reinforced their attacks on the communities of color, immigrants, and Muslims. And we saw followers of the Trump administration and people who supported that view of how Muslim Americans were like a problem to society, how they felt like they wanted to hurt those people just by participating in their traditional practices. We've seen extreme instances, unfortunately, of how people decided to attack mosques, people just participating in their traditional cultural practices. And so that's the reinforcement in which these bans did, is that people felt like it was okay to attack those people and those communities when it is not.
Okay, and so the next social identity that we're going to be talking about is sexual orientation. And so compared to the other social identities that we've talked about, politically, there's been some recent change with issues surrounding the social identity. And so actually just in 2015, same-sex marriage was legalized in all 50 states. So before 2015, there were 14 states in the United States that did not allow for gay couples to get married. And so, that was just 6 years ago that this had happened. And to give some background, so in 1996, there was a bill introduced by Bill Clinton, the Defense of Marriage Act. And basically what that said was that the only legal marriage seen in the United States and approved by the government is one between a man and a woman. And so when we say legally, it's important to understand that, yes, individuals can get married if they want to. However, they would not be legally seen as married by the government. And that plays into a lot of roles. We know that as a couple, you file taxes, or there are other governmental things that you do as a married couple that you don't get that privilege to do if you're not seen as a couple legally. And so that was really the issue with that, besides the fact that just in general that was discriminatory for individuals who identified as not being privileged with their sexual orientation. And so here we have Eddie and Thea. And so Eddie and Thea, basically their story was that they were together for a big part of the mid 1900s, and around 1970 they were engaged. And then they were engaged, but at that time there was really no place for them to legally be married. And so in 2007 they went to Canada and they got married, because at the time they lived in New York, and New York did not allow for a same-sex marriage. And so Eddie and Thea really worked most of their life being activists and having their voice heard for those, not for themselves, but for people who came after them, for people our age or people like us who now live in a country where you can legally get married to whoever you want to get married to. And so unfortunately in 2009, Thea had passed away. And so she didn't, get to see that now same-sex marriage is legal in the United States, and that, we are making strides towards providing more of an equality for individuals who are different, who have different sexual orientations. And so obviously this is a work in progress. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to the social identity of sexual orientation.
And the social construct behind sexual orientation is just the divide amongst the belief in non-traditional marriages. I know a common phrase that I have heard, even portrayed in like movies or just like amongst people, is that the common misconception of non-traditional marriages and how it ruins marriage for straight couples. But like Soad said, we do have a ways to go. But I do like to see the progress and the change in which is how the LGBTQ plus community receives a good amount of support now compared to years prior. And so I strongly believe that at some point in our society, it won't be much of a problem, as we could see the progression in terms of how, like Soad mentioned, 50 states have legalized same-sex marriages. And I play the video first, I believe, and then we'll get right into the Delmar divide.
Delmar Boulevard cuts through the center of the city, a visible line separating the haves from the have-nots. To the south, you see upscale houses, art galleries, and antique shops. Drive a couple of blocks north, and the character of the city changes.
Where I lived, just south of Delmar,
We can hear the gunshots coming from north of Delmar.
as you drive up, you'll start to see like the difference in development. And the north is where there's like less development, and the south is generally where there's been more.
From the air, the Delmar divide is clear to see. The neighborhood north of Delmar Boulevard is 99% black. To the south, it's 70% white. House prices are nearly 5 times larger to the south of Delmar than to the north. And if you live south of Delmar Boulevard, you're 7 times more likely to have a bachelor's degree than to the north. It feels like there's a narrowing of possibilities once you cross over Delmar Boulevard, and many residents here feel powerless.
It's the color of your skin at the end of the day. And nobody's going to make me believe any different. It's the color of your skin and it's economics. I'm treated different because I am black.
Okay. And so, as we know, the Delmar Divide is something here in St. Louis. And so, if you did not know about this before, I would really urge you to, after this, maybe look into it more and really understand what is happening in our own city. But it's really important when we talk about class to understand that it really can play a big role into intersectionality. And so here we have just some statistics on how not just women, but women of various races and ethnicities can experience more discrimination just based off of how they identify. And so, in general, a woman is going to make 80 cents per dollar that a man makes. But African American women are going to make 61 cents per 80 cents of a white woman per dollar of a white male. And then Latino women will make 53 cents. And so here you can see that really how the concept of intersectionality can come into play, that because you identify as a woman, because you identify as a certain race or as a certain ethnicity, that you will experience more discrimination. And so we do see this play out a lot into class. Class tends to come with your different social identities that also may involve education, may involve ability. So it really can merge all of your social identities, and based off of that, you'll experience some sort of discrimination.
And so the social construct behind the Delmar Divide is that it's really created a false social norm of like minority groups not being able to improve or are not capable of improving their social status. And this is the topic in which I really wanted to bring up, especially when I bring back the Plessy versus Ferguson, that separate but equal. Although the Delmar Divide was not intentionally segregated, economically, like how the woman in the video said, people in the poor side of the community are a majority of people of color, are minorities, and because they live in a poor area, they do not have the amount of resources to be able to improve their social status as much as you did if you were on the richer side of the Delmar Divide. So if for where I were to go to high school, if I were on that poor side of the divide, my education wouldn't be the same. And which would then limit my resources in terms of if I wanted to pursue a college education, and even if I weren't able to pursue a college education. And so 70% more likely to receive a bachelor's degree if you were on that richer side of the divide. So that's a pretty significant compared to the 10% on the other side. And if you don't receive a bachelor's degree, that then limits where you could put your foot through the door for many opportunities that could help improve your socioeconomic status and help you move out to better areas. But unfortunately, when your environment is so against you wanting to improve, then that just makes it extremely harder for you to be able to do that as well. And that's where that false social norm of people not being capable of improving their status comes from.
Okay, so now that we've talked about all of these various discriminatory laws, the main reason why we wanted to bring this into perspective was that so we could understand that the discrimination that we see in our country is not solely based off of, how society thinks or what society wants, but political power is really important. Political power can influence a lot. And so if we do want to cause any change, if we want to, move a step forward, like legalizing same-sex marriage in the United States, we have to begin by changing some of the policies that we see. And the only way we can do that is if we elect individuals who represent us and who think like us and who want the same things that we want. And so as we saw just a couple months ago with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that there was an open seat in which a new Supreme Court justice could be nominated. And so we know that one of the things that the President of the United States can do is that he can nominate someone. And he did. And we saw the controversy around this candidate, and some of us heard things, and we couldn't believe how someone could be nominated into a seat with those sorts of views in this day and age. And the only thing really that we can say to that is it was our responsibility. We elected a president of the United States, and his rights are his rights, and he does what he can do under the Constitution, and this was his right. And because of a choice that we made, these are the results that we get. And so besides, nominating a Supreme Court justice, the president can also appoint federal judges. And so I talked about this earlier when we talked about the Muslim ban. And federal judges, one federal judge was able to, remove a Muslim ban. And so that's huge. That's basically undoing an executive order of the president of the United States. And that federal judge in particular was not nominated by Donald Trump at the time, but he still was able to do that. The president can also appoint ambassadors, other officers, Senate confirmations, stuff of that. And so, there's a lot that the president can do, and we can't talk about everything that he can do, but we do need to understand that he does have some power when it comes to other positions. And so when we vote for this individual, we need to understand the power that they have and what they can do with it. And then obviously we spoke about executive orders. And so we saw the Muslim ban come forth as executive orders. We saw just recently how, Joe Biden signed 20 executive orders in one day. And so this is a power of the president again. And then another thing that I found to be very interesting was threat of veto legislation. And so what the president can do is they can say, I'm not going to approve this piece of legislation unless I benefit from it somehow. And so threatening to veto a piece of legislation, oftentimes the other party, what they're going to do is they are going to compromise. They'd rather have some sort of what they want be politically, put forth than nothing at all. And so this does end up happening. And so obviously we can talk all day about the political powers that the president has, but what we want you to really understand is that when you vote for one person, whether that be the president, whether that be the vice president, there are certain responsibilities and powers that come with that, and they can shape society. They can shape the government. And so you really want to understand that the candidate that you are choosing is going to affect a lot of your daily life and have powers that you may not really know about. Okay, and so obviously with that, we have to talk about how to vote. And so obviously the general election just passed, but it's okay because there are local elections that happen throughout the 4 years. And so one thing you do want to make sure is that you are keeping up with dates. Dates are going to be really important. If you miss a date, there's no, oh, none of that. You can't. You miss a date, you can't vote. And so the one thing that you want to make sure, and you can do this at any time, is make sure that you're registered to vote. And once you do that, you want to determine if you're going to vote by mail, absentee, or in person. Because of the pandemic, there are ways that you can vote not in person and still have your vote count, obviously. And so once you've determined the way you want to vote, you want to request your mail-in ballot or your absentee ballot if you are going to be going through that route. But again, it's just important to keep up with dates. You need to request ballots by a certain time. You need to register to vote by a certain time. You need to mail in your absentee or mail-in ballot by a certain time. And so really when you know that an election is coming up, whether that be local, general, you want to look at the dates as far ahead as you can.
I would just like to talk about absentee voting because I was actually an absentee voter. Something like good to know about, like how Soad mentioned, is being up with dates. As an absentee voter, your ballot must be received 7 p.m. on election day. So in order for you to get that on time, the best way to do that stuff is just to follow the deadlines. When you request your absentee and that comes to you in the mail, what's very helpful is that they give you a sheet of paper in which certain counties from your area where you could mail your absentee to. And so the process is very simple. All you need to do really is just keep count of the date and when certain things need to be done on time. I know there is something about being notarized, which is I can't remember. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so you do need to get, so if you're not approved for absentee voting, you do need to get your ballot notarized, and that does take time. You can do that at a bank. So you just want to take into account that there are various steps that you have to take that will take time. So, if you know that your ballot, for example, these were dates that we had for the general election, but if they have to be received by November 3rd, when can you get that notarized? You want to do that as far ahead as possible. You want to mail it in as far ahead as possible. But because of the pandemic, at the time, COVID-19 was a reason as to why individuals voted absentee. And so in that case, not many individuals had to get their ballots notarized, but this is for future in case, whenever things go back to normal. That's a big whenever, but when it does, there are certain steps in the process that you do have to take to ensure that your vote does count. Okay, and then I'm quickly just going to go run over Congress. I'm not really going to talk about a lot of what Congress does, but what I do want to say is that oftentimes when we vote, we focus on the president and the vice president, and that's all really we care about. But just like we said at the beginning of the video, the president and the vice president are not your whole system. You have 470 seats in Congress, 35 Senate seats, and then 435 House seats. And each one of these individuals is going to represent you in your own state. And they have a lot of power. They can make laws, they conduct investigations, they hold hearings, and essentially, and most importantly, they're your voice. And as you know, in the general election, as we saw, electoral votes are the votes that, each president is going to get from individuals of the House and the Senate. And so when you're voting for these individuals, you really want to understand that they are going to be voting essentially for you. So are you electing the person that's going to represent you and your beliefs? Are they the ones that are going to make laws and conduct hearings? And when bills are put forth, are they going to represent what you want and what you want this country to see in the future? And so, again, Congress and other positions that, we'll get into soon, hopefully, they hold power, whether that be a little power, a lot of power, they hold some sort of power. And everything is going to be important politically when we're talking about moving forward and trying to change pieces of legislation to have more equality in this country. And then quickly, these were just some positions that were up for election in Missouri. And the one that we want to talk about, throughout, there's a lot of positions that we see here, but the one that we want to talk about is Attorney General. And so I don't know if you all were following the case of Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, but essentially the results that we saw of her hearing were due to the ruling of the Attorney General of Kentucky at the time. And so when you think of that and you think of the state that you live in, if something were to happen to you or to someone that you know in this state, who would you want to have be held responsible for the decision of the outcome? And so the person that we elected, I'm not really sure who was elected, they're now going to be responsible if a situation like this happens in our state. And so you want to keep that in mind when you do vote for these positions that you might not really know about or hear about, but again, they are always important. Okay, and so I think we have about, can we go over 2 minutes? Is that okay?
What was that, Soad?
I was just asking I don't know if anyone's in here moderating with us, but okay, we'll just go on for about 2 more minutes. But at the end of the day, why should John Doe vote? So we had John Doe at the beginning, with their social identities. Why? Why is it important to vote? The reason why is we really need to understand that voting in itself is a privilege. Not everyone in this country is able to vote. And so oftentimes we take that privilege for granted. Voting is how our country runs. It's how we can hopefully slowly change a system. And so if you don't want to be the voice of yourself, at least try to be the voice of other people. For individuals who can't vote, you want to try and change. If we really want to start making steps toward changing the system, which we do see, systematic racism and things of that sort. If we do want to change these laws and we want these laws to be something that we actually want to see in our country, we have to start changing who's implementing them. Are the individuals that are holding power in our country, are they people who want the same things that we want? Do they want to strive towards equality? Or do they have their own agenda? What agenda are they following? And so, a lot of times we take voting for granted, but politically, and as we saw, politics really influences society and the social constructs that form as a part of that. And so if we really do want to start somewhere, what we can do is start with taking advantage of our privilege of voting, of electing the people that we want to see in office so they can have the change that we want in this country. And so that's really all from us. We really hope that, the general election did pass, but we do hope that you all really think about the next local election coming up and really participating in that and taking it just as if it were important as a general election. But unless we have any questions, I know we went 2 minutes over time, but thank you all for coming and listening to your presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, I see the chat. I see how the chat works now.
Yeah. Aw, thank you guys.
Are we supposed to wait for someone to hop in here after, or do we just leave?
I think we'll wait until. Mari, do you know? Aw, thank you, Kyla. She said you can leave. Okay, have a great day, everyone.
Good day, everybody.